What is the most vulnerable part of a warship? We imagine it's the armor belt, the thick steel designed to absorb enemy shells, or perhaps the magazine, packed with high explosives, or the rudder and propellers, the very things that give it life and motion. But what if the true vulnerability was something else entirely? Something so mundane, so utterly basic, that it was never considered a threat. This is not a theoretical question. In the final desperate days of the Second World War, the crew of a German U-boat discovered the answer in the most horrifying way possible. Their submarine, one of the most advanced undersea predators ever built, was not doomed by a British depth charge or a well-aimed torpedo. It was doomed by a toilet. This is the story of how technological ambition collided with human fallibility, and how a masterpiece of engineering was defeated by its own design. To understand the depth of this failure, we must first understand the grand illusion of American air power. In the 1930s, as Nazi Germany was building its terrifying war machine, the United States clung to a powerful idea: that a new kind of warplane could make bloody trench warfare obsolete. This bomber would be so fast, so high-flying, and so heavily armed that it could defend itself against any enemy fighter. It wouldn't need an escort. It would be a fortress. And when the Boeing Model 299 rolled out in 1935, it looked the part. It was massive, with a wingspan wider than a blue whale is long. It had 4 powerful engines, and it was armed with 5 machine guns. A newspaper reporter, stunned by its formidable appearance, dubbed it the Flying Fortress in his article. The name was a propaganda gift. It captured the public's imagination and cemented a dangerous idea in the minds of military strategists. This bomber was invincible. But this illusion was built on a fatal miscalculation. The early war games and theories had not accounted for the sheer brutality of integrated air defense. They imagined a few brave fighters attacking a lone bomber. They did not imagine a coordinated swarm of them, guided by radar, attacking from all angles. They did not imagine the hellish storm of flak, the anti-aircraft artillery that would turn the sky into a shredded metal inferno. The B-17 was designed for a gentleman's duel. It was about to be thrown into a back-alley knife fight. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, these untested fortresses, and the even more untested boys who would crew them, were shipped to England. They became the spearhead of the newly formed 8th Air Force. Their commander, General Ira Aker, was a true believer in the doctrine of precision daylight bombing. While the British bombed by night, aiming to destroy entire cities and break civilian morale, the Americans would fly by day. They would use their secret weapon, the Norden bomb sight, a complex, gyroscopically stabilized analog computer that was touted as being able to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. They would surgically dismantle the German war machine, hitting factories, oil refineries, and ball-bearing plants with pinpoint accuracy. It was a noble, clean, and utterly naive idea. The reality was about to hit them like a sledgehammer. The man tasked with commanding this technological wonder was Kapitanleutnant Karl Adolf Schlitt. At 25 years old, he was young for such a command, and U-1206 was his first. His crew was a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits. They were drilled relentlessly on every aspect of submarine warfare: crash dives, torpedo attacks, silent running. They knew how to fight and how to hide. but the evidence suggests their training on this new complex sanitary system was, at best, perfunctory. They were handed a weapon of war with a component so complicated that using it incorrectly could be as catastrophic as a direct hit. The stage was set for a tragedy of errors. When U-1206 slipped its moorings in Kiel on April 2, 1945, and slid into the cold, dark waters of the North Sea, it was a predator armed for war, but burdened with a hidden internal flaw. It was a flaw that was waiting, deep beneath the waves, for one simple, fatal mistake. In the grim aftermath of Black Thursday, a desperate search for solutions began. The Americans were too committed to the B-17 and the doctrine of daylight bombing to simply quit. The answer, it turned out, was not to abandon the fortress, but to give it a fighting chance. This came in two parts, a guardian angel and a smarter way to fight. The guardian angel was the P-51 Mustang. On paper, it was just another fighter. But when engineers paired its elegant low-drag airframe with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, they created something magical. The P-51 had the speed and maneuverability to duel with the best German fighters, but its true genius was its range. With the addition of external fuel tanks, it could fly all the way to Berlin and back. For the first time, the B-17s had a little friend that could stick with them for the entire mission. The impact was immediate and psychological as much as tactical. The bomber crews, who had felt alone and exposed for so long, would look out their frozen windows and see the sleek, powerful shapes of the Mustangs weaving gracefully around their formation. The P-51 pilots were given a new, aggressive mandate. Don't just defend the bombers, hunt the enemy. Seek out the German fighters and destroy them before they can even get close. The Luftwaffe, already suffering from a shortage of experienced pilots, was now being bled white. The P-51s owned the sky. The second part of the solution was the perfection of the combat box formation. This was the evolution of the original fortress theory, refined through blood and experience. Instead of a loose gaggle of planes, the bombers flew in a tight, three-dimensional staggered formation. Each group of 18 to 21 aircraft was positioned so that their gun coverage overlapped, creating a virtual dome of steel around the entire formation. There were no safe angles of attack anymore. A German pilot diving on the formation would have to fly through a hailstorm of .5 caliber bullets from dozens of guns. Flying in the combat box required incredible skill and nerve from the pilots. They had to hold their position, sometimes with wingtips just feet apart, in turbulent air while being shot at. It was an aerial ballet performed under hellish conditions. But the discipline paid off. The combined firepower of a well-formed combat box was devastating. The fortresses were finally living up to their name, not through individual strength, but through collective, disciplined defense. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force was no longer a vulnerable target. It was a sledgehammer. Under a new, aggressive commander, General Jimmy Doolittle, the strategy shifted completely. His famous order to his fighter pilots was simple. My primary mission is to destroy the German Air Force. You will go with the bombers, but your job is to kill German fighters. Where you find them, in the air, on the ground, it doesn't matter. Kill them. This new philosophy was unleashed during Big Week in February 1944. For 6 days, the 8th Air Force, in a coordinated campaign with other Allied air forces, launched a massive assault on the German aircraft industry itself. The goal was to lure the Luftwaffe into a final, decisive battle of attrition. And the Luftwaffe had to respond. They rose to defend their factories, and they were met by a wall of P-51s and the impenetrable combat boxes of B-17s. The losses were heavy on both sides, but the Americans could replace their planes and pilots. The Germans could not. Big Week was a strategic triumph from which the Luftwaffe never recovered. From that point on, the B-17s ruled the skies of Europe. The formations grew larger and larger, 1,000 bombers or more, darkening the sky in a seemingly endless stream. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring display of industrial power. Their targets were expanded to systematically dismantle the German war machine. Oil refineries, synthetic fuel plants, transportation networks, and tank factories. The B-17 had completed its journey. It was no longer the vulnerable flying coffin. It was the delivery system for a storm of fire and iron that was systematically strangling the Nazi war effort. The bombs that fell from its bays were cutting off fuel to Rommel's tanks in Africa, starving ammunition to the troops at the Eastern Front, and shattering the myth of German invincibility at home. The fortress, once a symbol of doomed American naivete, was now an instrument of inevitable victory. When the war ended, the statistics told a story of almost unimaginable sacrifice. Of the 12,731 B-17s built, over 4,750 were lost in combat. The 8th Air Force suffered more casualties than the entire United States Marine Corps, over 26,000 men killed. The flying coffin had earned its name many times over. But in the end, it transcended it. The term became not a mark of shame, but a badge of honor, a testament to the resilience of the machine and the extraordinary courage of the men who flew it. They were not supermen. They were teenagers and young men, mechanics and teachers, farmers and students. They were terrified, they were brave, and they did their duty. The B-17 didn't win the war by itself, but it played a pivotal role in one of the war's most critical campaigns. It proved that daylight strategic bombing, while horrifically costly, could work. It helped cripple the German economy and secure air superiority for the D-Day landings. The true legacy of the Flying Fortress is not just in the factories it destroyed, but in the stories of the men who climbed into its frozen confines, mission after mission, facing odds that no one should ever have to face. They took a machine dubbed a coffin and, through sheer courage and determination, turned it into a symbol of ultimate triumph. They were the heart of the fortress, and we owe them a debt that can never be repaid. The command to surface was no longer a tactical choice. It was a desperate fight for survival. To stay submerged was to die, slowly and agonizingly from asphyxiation. The ballast tanks were blown, and U-1206 began a frantic, uncontrolled ascent, its crew gasping and retching in the poisonous atmosphere. They broke the surface not as stealthy hunters, but as a wounded, gasping whale, vomiting toxic air from its vents and wallowing helplessly in the swells. They had solved the immediate problem of the gas, but in doing so, they had committed the ultimate sin for a submarine. They had revealed their position in broad daylight in heavily patrolled enemy waters. They had traded one certain death for another. The hunter was now exposed, crippled, and waiting for the kill. The fresh, salty air that flooded into U-1206 as the hatches were thrown open was a sweet, life-giving relief to the choking crew. For a few precious moments, there was only the sound of desperate gasps and the lap of waves against the steel hull. But that relief was brutally short-lived. They were exposed. A submarine on the surface is a vulnerable creature, and U-1206 was now a sitting duck, silhouetted against the horizon for any Allied plane or ship to see. Their state-of-the-art vessel, designed for invisibility, was now completely and utterly blindsided. The very technology meant to grant them ultimate stealth had instead delivered them into the hands of their enemies. It didn't take long for the response to come. Whether it was a patrolling British Lockheed Hudson aircraft or the guns of a nearby naval vessel, the records indicate that the stranded U-boat was quickly spotted and engaged. With his boat unable to dive, its interior poisoned, and its ballast tanks likely compromised, Captain Lieutenant Schlitt faced a command decision with no good outcome. He could not fight a surface battle. A submarine's deck gun is no match for a warship's artillery. He could not run. His electric motors were no match for a destroyer's turbines. He could not hide. The sea itself had rejected him. His only remaining duty, to prevent the advanced secrets of the Type 7C U-boat from falling into enemy hands, left him with one final, humiliating order. By the spring of 1945, the once proud U-boat arm of the Kriegsmarine was a shadow of its former self. The gray wolves that had once hunted in packs across the Atlantic, bringing Britain to its knees, were now the hunted. The Allies had closed the air gap. Their sonar was more sophisticated, their hunter-killer groups more numerous and deadly. For a U-boat commander, survival was a mathematical equation of silence and depth. The longer you could stay hidden, the longer you lived. But this created an insoluble problem, a conflict between human biology and military necessity. A submarine is a sealed metal tube, and 50 men trapped inside it produce waste. The standard toilet systems on earlier U-boats were simple, almost primitive. They could only be used when the boat was on the surface or at very shallow depths, relying on gravity and low water pressure to function. For a boat that needed to lurk at 200 feet to avoid detection, surfacing to use the head was a potentially suicidal act. It was a critical vulnerability, a chink in the armor of stealth. The command was given, Schiff versenken, scuttle the ship. The crew, trained to fight to the last, now had to perform the last rites on their own vessel. Seacocks were opened, allowing the North Sea to flood in deliberately. Explosive charges were set to ensure the boat would sink swiftly. In a final, profound twist of fate, the crew of U-1206 have to personally unleash the very element that had already defeated them. They were not vanquished by a superior foe in a fair fight. They were forced to destroy their own multi-million Reichsmark weapon because of a malfunctioning toilet. The submarine that was meant to deliver death instead met its end by the hands of its own crew, a silent admission of a defeat born not of combat, but of catastrophic mechanical failure. As the sea claimed U-126, the crew abandoned ship, spilling into life rafts to become prisoners of war. They were saved from the chlorine gas only to be captured, their war ending not with a bang, but with the gurgling sigh of a sinking hull. The entire disastrous sequence, from the faulty flush to the final plunge, unfolded in a matter of hours. A weapon born from years of design and months of construction was rendered useless in a fraction of that time, a testament to the fact that in the complex equation of warfare, the smallest, most overlooked variable can cancel out even the most powerful of forces. The wreck of U-1206 settled on the seabed, a silent, rusting tomb to one of the most improbable failures in naval history. For decades, its true story remained shrouded in official secrecy and personal embarrassment. When the crew was interrogated by British intelligence, the details were either misunderstood or deliberately downplayed. The official British report would simply state the submarine had been sunk after being forced to surface due to technical faults. It was a conveniently vague explanation that hid the humiliating truth. The Kriegsmarine had no interest in advertising that their advanced engineering had backfired so spectacularly, and the surviving crew members likely had little desire to be remembered as the men defeated by a toilet. Thus, the full story faded into obscurity, becoming little more than a bizarre rumor among naval historians. This suppression, however, points to a deeper truth. The loss of U-1206 is far more than a comical historical footnote. It is a stark, timeless lesson in the fundamental principles of design and complex systems management. We consistently obsess over the grand, visible metrics of power, the thickness of armor, the caliber of guns, the speed of processors. We fortify the obvious targets. Yet the story of U-1206 forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. What are the unseen, unglamorous, and utterly critical vulnerabilities we are building into our own complex systems today? The high-pressure toilet was not a weapon, but it was integrated into a weapons system. Its failure did not merely cause a minor malfunction. It triggered a catastrophic cascade that doomed the entire vessel. This pattern repeats itself throughout history, from the fatal design flaw in the Titanic's watertight compartments to the misplaced O-ring that doomed the Space Shuttle Challenger. In each case, a single, underestimated component operating at the intersection of technology and human operation proved to be the system's ultimate point of failure. The legacy of U-1206, therefore, is a warning that echoes far beyond the cold depths of the North Sea. It reminds us that the greatest threat to any complex system, be it a submarine, a spacecraft, a financial network, or a digital infrastructure, may not come from a direct external attack. The greatest threat may already be lurking within, hidden in a line of code no one has thoroughly checked, in a valve that was never properly tested under all conditions, or in a procedure that is too complicated for a stressed operator to follow perfectly. It is a lesson written not in gunpowder and glory, but in saltwater and tragic, inescapable irony. The ocean did not defeat U-1206. Its own ambition did.